Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the ATA Podcast Specialization Series, a special collaboration between the ATA Podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. I'm Ann Connor, and I am a member of ATA's Professional Development Committee. We are thrilled to bring you this episode where we'll hear about dental translation from a dentist. Joining me today is our special guest, Mario Muchacho, who will tell us about his work in this area. Mario is a dentist and English to Spanish medical translator based in Colombia. He has spent over 5 years blending his academic knowledge and clinical experience with linguistic skills to provide translation services. Mario enjoys reading magazines and academic journals, is a technology enthusiast, loves photography, and likes to write evidence-based content for various publications. His articles have been featured in Inside Dentistry and Dental Economics, and he currently writes a blog about dental translation. Welcome, Mario. Can you describe your background to us and tell us how you found your way to dentistry and ultimately dental translation?
Hi, Anne. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. As you said, I'm a dentist born and raised in Venezuela, but I'm based in Colombia since 2018. I am from a small city in Venezuela called San Felipe, where I lived until I was 17 when I moved to Valencia to attend dental school. I studied at Universidad de Carabobo, and although at first I wanted to study medicine, I'm glad that I became a dentist because I find fascinating the combination of art, medicine, science, and cutting-edge technology we find in dentistry. I think it's awesome. And dental translation, on the other hand, is a little bit more recent to me, and it's the result of a combination of knowledge and skills I've earned over these past few years as a freelance translator. With the intention to provide the most specialized and professional service I can offer in this very niche area of medical translation, which seems to be a little bit ignored sometimes. And, as a subject matter expert, I would love to change that.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Can you tell us about how your career shifted from dentist to translator?
Sure. That's an interesting story, actually. When I was a senior student, in dental school, I faced the fact that I didn't enjoy most clinical aspects of dental practice, which is a hard thing to realize when you're about to graduate, right? And at the time, non-clinical options for healthcare professionals were not as popular as today. So I didn't have many examples of dentists who were practicing dentistry in a non-clinical way. So, I had to do a little exploring. I had to look at myself and see what options or what my options were. Was I going to commit my life to a practice I didn't fully enjoy? What other options I had, right? I love learning and always have. I was always that kid who was reading an interesting magazine, a National Geographic article, learning things online. And English was one of those things that I became obsessed with. I remember wanting to be able to speak from a very young age and so I used all the resources I had within my reach to learn as much as possible. And when I was about 12, I think I was already speaking English decently, although I kept practicing and improving over the years, and I still do, obviously. But long story short, I realized that I had an underexploited skill that I had never even considered as a career option. And after some research, I found that translation was a profession that could be practiced remotely, which aligned with my plans at the moment, and that demand for qualified medical translators was on the rise. So I definitely saw an opportunity to try something different and to combine my skills and education to explore a different and maybe more fulfilling professional path. And I sure did, but I had a lot to learn ahead of me, of course. So that's when I initiated this journey of over 5 years already, and hopefully many more.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, first of all, your English is better than mine, and I'm a native speaker, so I like the words that you're
Well,
using,
thank you.
high vocabulary. But I was the same way. I mean, as a very young person, I wanted to learn other languages, so I took up Spanish and Italian, but I don't have any medical technical background. But what are the challenges that you faced over the past 5 years that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, the challenges I faced were mostly related with the way I came to translation. Because, when I decided I wanted to become a medical translator, I had no actual context about the profession. There's the first misconception that speaking two languages proficiently makes you qualified to translate stuff, which is evidently not the case, right? But there's
Right.
also the remaining question of, well, then what skills am I supposed to have, right? Which is not easy to get right when you don't have a language background. So I didn't even know what a cat tool was. I didn't know what the translation workflow looked like. I had no clue about so many stuff. So knowing what things I needed to focus on was a challenge, because at that time I only had the expertise in my subject matter, right? My technical background and the language proficiency. But there was a whole other skill set that I needed to develop on my own. So, I knew that was only possible up to a certain point. So I decided I wanted to first, gain some experience and learn as much as possible on my own. And I started to gain some experience in like freelance platforms and working with a few agencies, which was a great learning experience for me, obviously, because I got to learn things like terminology research, text processing, working with glossaries and style guides, all of that. So after gathering some experience, working with some agencies, and getting a real taste of what translation was as a profession, I was completely hooked in, and I decided it was time for me to seek more formal education and to learn from more experienced people. Now, one of the things I regret not doing sooner is joining a professional association. There's obviously, experience requirements that you need to meet before you can join one, but I recommend doing so as soon as you meet the criteria, right? Because I have learned so much, not only from the CPD activities they offer for their members, but also from the incredibly experienced people you can surround yourself with. And last but not least, and this is very specific to my specialization, resources about dental translation, at least in my language pair, are very limited. And often they are developed by clinicians and not language professionals. So in a way, that was also a challenge. But because I didn't have truly trusted references for working in my area. But I also learned to see that as an opportunity to fill that gap within the medical translation community.
Wow. That's, yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with the professional association, which I only joined my local and the national, the ATA, when I started as freelance because I was always in-house. And boy, what a difference. Um,
Honestly, yes.
yeah. And what are some typical translation assignments that you do, and who are some common types of clients? Like any noteworthy or interesting projects that you've done?
Well, currently I'm mostly working with general medical translation for, I don't know, clinical research documents, such as protocols, investigator brochures, patient recruitment materials, and others, for some CROs and a few agencies. I'm still taking my first steps in finding and working with direct clients. I'm really looking forward to that. And although I love medical translation in general, and I want to keep having diverse medical translation projects, I would love to be working mostly with dental clients and dental assignments, or at least as much as possible. So I'm starting to actively make connections within the dental industry, a little bit of networking, marketing my services, so I can start finding more clients in this specialization in dental translation. But I have had some dental assignments with these agency clients and CRO clients I'm working with. Just not many of them, unfortunately, so far. And since most of that work, I've done so far has been for these agencies, and obviously they're protected by NDAs and stuff, I can't disclose any of that. But I can tell you that dental translation is, at least from my experience, mostly concentrated in medical devices and dental materials research. There's a great incentive for dental companies to develop better materials and products for dental treatments. They're expensive, so obviously that's a great incentive for them. But honestly, that's also one of the reasons why I love dental science, because it's always been at the forefront of technological innovation in healthcare. So
Wow.
yes,
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. But then thinking of my own dentist here, she always gets all the latest technology whenever it comes out. So,
yes, it's true in dentistry. There's a lot of technology involved, and it's a very interesting, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a very interesting mix between medicine, art, technology. A lot of things come together in order to offer cutting edge technology in treatments. And that's basically one of the cornerstones in dentistry.
you're based in Colombia. So, what have you noticed about the differing regional needs and standards for some of the work that you do in your specialization?
And that's a great question. Yes, there are indeed several regional differences when it comes to dental language. I have noticed that in English, dental language is a lot simpler, which is true probably for English in general compared to Spanish. But one of those issues, at least in Spanish, would be the actual translation of the word dentistry to begin with. Generally, it's translated as odontología in most places and for the most part, but it also will depend on the country and even the institutions. Like, for instance, some places prefer to call it estomatología, although
Yes,
in English, stomatology is a specialization within in dentistry, not dentistry itself.
right.
So the terminology could be quite arbitrary in some cases. And another example, for instance, the terms used by patients can also be different. For example, here in Colombia, dental fillings are called calzas, which
Mm-hmm.
was, it was the first time I heard it when I came here, calzas. But in other places, they are called empastes or
Mm-hmm.
restauración. and professionals call them obturación. So there's definitely many differences in the language, depending on if you're talking to a patient, you're talking to another specialist, the place you are in. So yes, it could change a lot.
No, that's true. And I have to know as Spanish to English translator which market it's coming from, which country or territory, because that's like you said, it's estomatología. It could be, just dentistry, and if it comes from one country, and otherwise it's the specialty. And so if my agency client doesn't know, I try to find out, can you see where this is from? If I just get a page or two from, some document for somebody in the United States that comes from another country, I try to find that out because of those differing
Yes,
regional
it's
terms.
definitely something to keep an eye on, because as I said, in some countries, like for instance in Cuba, stomatología is dentistry, but there are other Latin American countries where stomatología is also a specialization within dentistry. So it's going to change a lot. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
And that's another reason to belong to an association, because if I'm really stuck, I can put it up on Espalista, the Spanish division, forum, and somebody can say, oh, yeah, it's from this country. This is what it means. But okay, so
Yes.
can you tell us some of your thoughts regarding what impacts you see from machine translation and AI on the field?
I think we can talk about both, because I think it makes an interesting, I think it works for an interesting comparison here. Obviously machine translation, it only applies to the language industry, but then AI also has been like this buzzword that lately has so much negativity attached to it in the language industry, with valid reasons, of course. But here's the thing. In dentistry, AI is also, the adoption of AI in dentistry is very enthusiastic, and dentists are adopting these new technologies, which is no surprise, in this field that is heavily reliant on dentistry, on technology, sorry. But here's the thing, the FDI, which is the International Dental Federation, they have developed these guidelines for the ethical use of AI within dentistry. Because we all know that, yes, AI can be great. They can offer many benefits, but it can also present some dangers, right? And we can only make a ethical use of it if we know how to use it, but if we also are aware of the dangers it may present. So they developed these ethical guidelines that I find very interesting, because it shows that they are worried about protecting not only dentists, but the patients. Because, if we make a comparison with the language industry, as I said, like patients would be clients in this case, and the dentist would be the translators or linguists, or any other roles in the language industry. And it feels a little bit like AI in the language industry is not being designed for, or at least no one is thinking about protecting the translators or the clients. I mean, you can only think, or you can only imagine what the risk could be if we let an AI assistant do a dental treatment without any human supervision, right?
Oh my goodness. No, yeah, that's a danger to health.
Obviously, that could be
Sure.
very wrong. So I feel that, like in the language industry, no one is looking after clients, which at the end of the day, these companies are developing technology in order to get like a financial return. And clients will always want to be, will always would like to pay less, although they do not, or they are not aware of the downside of it. And I think it's very interesting because I see a lot of negativity in the language industry regarding AI, regarding technology, machine translation, and all these tools that are being developed. When actually I don't see them as the enemy, or I don't see them as the problem, but the way they are being implemented is the real issue here. And we can see great examples of how AI is being implemented in a way that is actually working for the professionals and not, I would say, impairing the final result for the client. And I think we need to see a little bit more of that in the language industry. I see a little bit similar situation because dentistry is kind of a lonely profession too, as translation. I think a lot of translators would agree that they mostly they have to work on their own, alone in their home, and like there's not a lot of feedback involved as well. So I think it makes total sense for translators to have like an AI assistant, to have a tool that can help them, accomplish their goals or their tasks more efficiently. But right now, those tools are not working for the translator, but for the companies, right? So yes, that's my take on it.
Or branch out into interpreting, which I did, because I used to do a lot of this clinical research organization work, clinical trials and things for Spanish and Italian. And then when the pandemic lockdowns happened, it all dried up. I worked with agency clients, and now I'm doing my dream stuff. I'm out interpreting, and I see the direct feedback. It's wonderful. And so far, they don't want any AI interpreters in dental offices or medical offices or schools, any place that I go, they want the human being. So for now, I'm really glad about that because of the nuances and the ability to be there and clarify, what the patient or the provider means, by a certain term. I think that's something that AI maybe eventually will be able to do, but right now, I think that's. I think
Yes, I
the
mean,
points you made are very valid.
yes, and like you mentioned something very important, which is that people are becoming more aware of this issue. And um I think it's pretty obvious that this AI thing is not going to stop any soon. But I think people are starting to become aware that we always need a human. AI is just a tool, and probably, as you see when I told you about, or when I compare the situation between language industry and dentistry, like if you had like an AI or a robot powered by AI do your dental treatment, would you feel more or safer than a human doing it, that if
No,
a
sir.
human
No,
was
sir.
doing it?
No,
Exactly. So
señor.
exactly. So people are starting to realize that, and I think it's gonna get to a point where people are gonna be demanding services from a human. Like if they have a service, I don't know, if you have an internet service provider, let's just say that you have to call them because you have an issue, and a machine is going to be answering, you're probably going to be changing companies, right? You're going to be changing
Yes, you got that
the
right.
provider, because you want to be with the service provider who has humans working for them. So I think it's gonna get to that point, and I think a lot more people are realizing that these days.
Amen. Amen, brother. Okay, so my final question, I believe, unless you have anything else to discuss, because I did mention the interpreting field, and I do think this podcast will be relevant for interpreters because we're always looking for glossaries, for research suggestions where to get the terminology. And you do have that advantage of being in the dental profession and having that technological medical background, which many of us do not, and we learn it along the way, kind of the opposite of your journey. So are there any either English, Spanish, or English only dental glossaries that you can recommend, or any other research websites you can recommend for both interpreters and translators?
Yes, there's a few, although as I said, not many resources about dental translation, and some of them have been developed by dental professionals, right? There are still very good resources though. But you know what? It's gonna depend on, because here's the thing: dentistry has like all these specializations, like endodontics, periodontics, pediatric dentistry, prosthodontics. You could go into a dental office and you can expect to see so many different procedures being done. So, and each specialization has their own very specialized vocabulary and terminology. So it's a very like wide sorry, I'm not finding the right word here.
Like field, like a wide field of research.
Yes, yes, it's definitely a wide field with so much terminology and so much to cover. But yes, there are a few dental glossaries, although not bilingual. Well, yes, there is one bilingual glossary that was developed in Cuba. Although I think it's a little bit outdated. It hasn't been like edited recently, but it's a good starting point. And you know, it has a lot of terminology. And for interpreters, for instance, I would recommend this glossary that Colgate has, but it's not really a glossary. I mean, they probably were poorly advised on that because it's more like a collection of phrases. And I think it's more aimed at dental professionals who have to work with non-English speaking patients, because it has next to it like the pronunciation, like written in like English, but definitely like not the phonetic transcription. Definitely, if I'm gonna send you the link to that so you can take a look
and we
at
can
it.
post it when the podcast is sent out to the ATA.
Yes,
and you know, online.
that
That'd be great. Thank you.
that,
So
that that's
Colgate, the
available.
toothpaste people, the company Colgate, right?
Yes, the company Colgate, and it's available in many languages. It's not only in English and Spanish. I checked the Spanish version, and I thought it was okay. It was a great starting point. So I assume that the others are also good, but you know, you can never know about these things.
No,
And
for
you
sure.
know,
But it's like you say, a
and
starting point, because we're dealing with so many different languages, and if they have that basis, and for the particular job they're either going out to interpret or working on for translation, they will have something to start on and give them a lot, you know, a lot of good stuff.
yes, and you know, these companies, these dental companies are the most popular dental companies, as Colgate, as I mentioned, or Oral-B. They also have the CE platforms, continuing education platforms, where they offer free webinars and courses, and both in English and Spanish as well.
Wow.
And I see those more aimed at a general public or maybe language professionals. So I would recommend those, checking out those. There's actually plenty of options out there.
Wonderful.
Dental companies such as Dentsply, which are like more specialized dental companies, they develop dental materials or equipment. They also have free learning opportunities and free CE opportunities, but they are more aimed at professionals and dental professionals or students, obviously. But yes, there's a lot of options out there.
Great. This is very valuable information. I'm really grateful that you took the time to speak with me and then to broadcast this information to the ATA. And if you could send me those links, we can maybe post them with the podcast. And I'm sure many members around the world of all different organizations who subscribe to the ATA Specialization podcast or just the regular ATA podcast will be fascinated by this. Thank you again, Mario, for joining me. And I hope to come across your path another time soon.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here to talk to you. And sure, you can reach out to me anytime you have any questions about dentistry, dental translation. I would love to help.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.